And there's one more type of panel that can be a bit difficult to make, and that's the curved panel. And here's a good example. As you can see, this little cabinet is curved, and these panels are kind of radially deformed or bent, or whatever you want to call it. And this can be a bit tricky to make in 3D. So for example, I have a panel made with bevel profile modifier here, and I want to bend it with a slight radius. So if the radius is not large and the panel is not large as well, you can do this with the bend modifier. Okay, like this. And as you can see right now, it doesn't really work. And that's because there's simply not enough information in the mesh to make this effect. As you can see, we need to add some vertical cuts, just so the bend modifier can calculate the points and how to distort them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an edit poly modifier, and I'm going to add some vertical cuts. When working with some real models, the thing you want to keep in mind is that you want to add these cuts only after you've finished all the modeling work and you have finished UV mapping for this panel. If you add these cuts before that, it can be quite tricky to map the model later on. So do that before, and add the cuts when you have everything ready. Okay, so add edit poly, and using the slice plane, I'm just going to quickly go ahead and add some cuts here. Try to space them evenly, or at least as close as you can get to that. Doesn't need to be perfect. The amount of these cuts depends on how smooth you want the resulting surface. The smoother you want it, the more cuts you need to add. And this is not the cleanest method, but it works when you're in a hurry. Okay, and when you go back to your bend modifier, you can see that it bends perfectly now. Okay, when the curvature is not too pronounced or too strong, this method can work just fine. But when the panel is very long and the curve is a bit stronger, it can be tricky, as you need to estimate the length of your original panel correctly before applying the bend modifier. Or if you don't like bend, you can also use the FFD modifier. For example, you can create some more complicated curves this way. Let's try an S-curve. It's the same idea. You can use the FFD box modifier and set the amount of segments to as many as you need. And you can create all sorts of shapes like this. Okay, but when the panel is longer and the distortion is more severe, this method can be quite difficult to use correctly, as you cannot accurately estimate the length of your panel. So in this case, it's sometimes easier to just use poly modeling tools to create the profile for the frame and for the panel. For example, let's say we want a perfect 1/4 of a circle. So let's say it's this piece here. I'm gonna add an extrude modifier. Okay. And I'm gonna change my spline interpolation steps so the two outer lines are about the frame's width away from the edge of my panel. So like this. Okay. Add shell. Let's make the shell go inwards. And you can use the edit poly to add some edges like this. So these edges will define our frame, right? And then you can select these inner polys and just extrude them, insert them, bevel them to create the profile. So let's say I'm gonna extrude them first. Okay, then I'm gonna insert them. Okay, then I'm gonna extrude again. Insert one more time, maybe a little bit less. And extrude just a little bit inwards again. Or maybe outwards. Okay, that's fine. Right. And it helps if you know the exact profile you want to make. So for example, I want to round this edge, so let's loop it and let's chamfer it to the max like this. And make a nice bead. So as you can see, you can use different techniques to achieve a very similar result. And neither of them is wrong. You can use any method as long as you get the final result you want in a short enough time frame. Okay. Sometimes you already have this curved surface or otherwise shaped surface and you just want to make it into a panel, and this method might be the fastest one in those cases. Okay, so let's add smooth. And from a distance you can't even see any faceting and it looks good. Okay. And one more thing about estimating the final size of the panel, if you decide to go with the FFD deformation or the bend deformation, is that you can try to do that by first creating a line in the shape you need to achieve. So let's say the line is like this. And then you can find out the exact length of the panel you need to create before deformation. If you go to your utilities, measure, and you can see the length of your spline here, and it's 313 centimeters or something. In this case, since I'm not working in a correct scale, it doesn't really matter, but you can see the exact length here. So if you create a panel or a rectangle that's exactly 313 centimeters wide, you can distort it into this exact shape and keep the proportions right. So that's another way you can make sure your final model is accurate.